Quiet Strength, Chapter 9. I don't yell a lot. In fact, yelling will be rare, I told the Buccaneers at our first team meeting. In addition to the change in coaching staff, I felt the culture of One Buck needed an infusion of fresh ideas. With that in mind, I believed this opening team meeting would be critical to setting the tone. When I get mad, I continued, I usually talk at the same volume I'm talking now. And when I get really mad, I paused. I whisper. So if my voice at this level won't get your attention, and you believe you need someone to yell at you to correct you or motivate you, then we'll probably need to find you another team to play for so that you can play your best. Which is interesting because some people might react to someone raising their voice or yelling at them, and others don't, and it almost like shuts you down. So Tony's philosophy is like he doesn't raise his voice. In that first meeting, I outlined several basic tenets that would become our hallmarks. Top 5 in the NFL in giveaway-takeaway ratio, top 5 in the NFL in fewest penalties, top 5 in overall special teams, make big plays, don't give up big plays. These basic tenets were not exactly rocket science. In fact, they are exactly the same principles I would later use with the Colts. Some people think of me as a defense-minded coach, or they think I somehow changed who I was as a coach when I went to Indianapolis. But the reality is, I'm a former college quarterback who played defense in the NFL and coached under Chuck Noll, Marty Schottenheimer, and Denny Green. I learned that it doesn't matter how you win. You play to your team's strength, whether it's offense, defense, or special teams. I believe the best way to achieve success in each of these 3 areas is by attention to detail and a commitment to the fundamentals, doing the ordinary things better than anyone else. I then began to talk about our future, going back to something Mr. Rooney had always taught us in Pittsburgh. I said, we expect to win a Super Bowl, but if that's all we do, it'll be pretty shallow. We need to not only win, but win with players who positively impact the Tampa Bay area. I told them I expected our team to live and play by the concept, whatever it takes, then ended with a second basic phrase, which I posted in our locker room. No excuses, no explanations. Overall, I thought it was a good, positive meeting that clearly outlined the frame of mind we needed to embrace for the future of the organization and for the future of our lives. When the meeting was finished, Herm felt the need to make sure everything was even more clear, so he selected some of the team leaders, including John Lynch, Warren Sapp, and Derek Brooks, and then he read them the riot act, reiterating everything I had just said, but in a much more animated manner. It was his first act as bad cop. Herm was so good in that role that I'm sure I never even knew about some of the issues faced by our team. Herm was my first line of defense. I've heard that he was known to tell guys, we can either resolve this now and get it behind us, or we can get Tony involved. I don't think any of us want that. Very few things hit my desk. So Tony, again, he has brought in all these coaches that have different strengths to his coaching staff to help him out. And one of the ones that he really wanted was Herm. And Herm ends up being the bad cop for him, so that way Tony can focus on other things. When I was in Minnesota, Denny Green had been a big proponent of creating what I call artificial adversity, making things tougher on the players than they had to be. He believed this was an essential foundation for handling the turbulence of a season or game. As coaches and players, he wanted us to all be comfortable enough with our routine to know what to expect and when. When we would have an upcoming Monday night game, and thereby an extra day available to practice and plan the game, he often gave us that extra day off or had us work on something that turned our attention away from our opponent. After all, he reasoned, if the coaches and players start to think that we need an extra day to prepare for a big game, what happens when we hit the playoffs and only have the usual number of days, or worse yet, a short week? If players got too comfortable in their routine, what would happen when that routine was disrupted? Players might begin to wonder, can we win a big game without an extra day? Sure we can, if we're efficient and disciplined. Denny knew that football, like life, is unpredictable, but it was our job to train the team to remain disciplined, even in unusual situations. As I thought about how to prepare the Bucs to handle any situation we might face, I went back to some of Denny's tactics. Once we had become locked in on a schedule, he often created disruption to that schedule just to see how guys would respond. During the preseason of my first year with the Vikings, Denny announced that we were going to Cleveland on the day of the game. He said we would get off the plane, head to the stadium, and play. This was unusual. Most teams travel to an away game at least a day before the game, sometimes arriving even 2 days early if it's especially a long trip. But Denny wanted to see how the players would adjust, who would adapt, and who couldn't. His larger point was that there is always going to be moments of adversity and confusion during a game or season, and players either adjust or they crumble. He wanted to know as much as possible ahead of time about the innate character of his team. On that occasion, the players grumbled a little, then flew to Cleveland and beat the Browns 51-3. During our first training camp in Tampa, we were headed to Jacksonville for a morning scrimmage with the Jaguars. Taking a lesson from Denny Green's playbook, I told Herm I wanted to disrupt the schedule and bus our guys to Jacksonville. Herm, the guys might think that we're just looking to save some money by driving up there. The Glazers were still trying to shed the frugal reputation the team had gotten from the prior owner. So I'll need your help. I want everyone to understand that I think it'll be good to disrupt their schedules. I think that's smart. Good. We'll leave at 5 o'clock. 5? You don't want to meet at the hotel that night? Just get up there, have dinner at the hotel, and then do bed checks? I mean 5 in the morning. We'll have a wake-up call at 4, leave at 5, roll in there, and scrimmage with Jacksonville. Herm didn't mind. He usually gets up at 4:30 anyway, but the players hated it. We emerged from the buses a little on the groggy side, just as I thought we would, and were destroyed by the Jaguars during the first practice of the morning. We were beaten physically and mentally. We got a little better in the afternoon. I told our players that I liked our improvement, but we could have done better. The players couldn't believe it. They thought they had done well under the circumstances. But that was my point. We couldn't let circumstances matter. If things got unusually tough for whatever reason, we still had to function and get the job done. No excuses. No explanations. As a team, we got some lasting benefit from that experience. For the next several years, when we get into crunch time in a game, I'd occasionally hear a player call out, "Come on, guys, it's time for a 5 o'clock bus ride." Whatever it takes. So this is an interesting lesson that one of his mentors, Denny Green, passes on to Tony Dungy, right? That you just never know what's going to happen, and you need to be prepared for anything. And so he does this tactic to his players right there at training camp. They're going to go scrimmage with Jacksonville, and he makes them take a bus really early in the morning, and they end up doing terribly at the scrimmage. But his lesson to them, right, is that you can't let circumstances matter, because things are going to pop up all the time that are out of the ordinary, and you have to learn how to deal with those things. It's like, if you maybe are a Tampa Bay team and you're used to all the nice, warm weather in Florida, well, if you go up to play the Green Bay Packers, right, what's going to happen? Are you going to be able to overcome the adversity there and play in the cold weather? And so you always have to be prepared for the unknown. And it's this phrase that he's been saying over and over and will continue to say over and over in this chapter, which is no excuses, no explanations, right? Get your job done. That first year, we definitely inherited some talent. In 1995, the Bucs had 2 first-round draft picks and came out with a terrific haul, Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks. When I got there in 1996, we had 2 more first-round picks, and we added to our defensive line again with both picks, Reagan Upshaw and Marcus Jones. In the defensive scheme we played to run, defensive linemen would be critical. Rod Marinella loved coaching in our system because of the spotlight it placed on his defensive linemen. My goal was to add to our core through the draft and then continue to add strategically through free agency. We wanted guys who had been productive in college, and we made it a point to pick performance over potential. Because the salary cap limits each team's total payroll, we only wanted to pay significant sums to keep truly special players. We decided we would let others leave for greener pastures and free agency, even if it meant taking a slight step backward while we groomed a successor. After emphasizing defense in the first round of the 1996 draft, we turned our attention to getting a big play guy on offense in the second round. The Jets had the first pick in each round that year. They took Keyshawn Johnson first overall. We wanted Leland McElroy, a running back out of Texas A&M, but we doubted he would still be available when our number 5 pick came in the second round. So Tim Ruskell, our director of player personnel, lined up a trade with the Jets if McElroy was still available when their pick arrived. He got on the phone with the Jets' general manager, James Shaq Harris, working out the particulars of the trade. I heard Tim conclude the conversation with, "But if our player is still on the board, we have a deal, right?" Good. The Redskins made their pick at the end of the first round, and McElroy was still on the board. We were ecstatic, and Tim had Shaq on speed dial. Before Shaq answered, however, the Jets' pick came in. Alex Van Dyke from Nevada, the Jets' second wide receiver in 2 rounds. They hadn't kept their part of our deal. Tim was not happy with Shaq picking up the phone and said, "Tim, I'm so sorry. When Van Dyke was still there, the coaches just went ahead and took him right away." We were thrown for a loop and began frantically working the phones to try again to move up from our pick. We called the 3 remaining teams in front of us, sure that one of them would take McElroy. We were offering picks, players, our children, but the Arizona Cardinals took McElroy with the next pick. The Jets, as it turned out, had been our only hope. We were disappointed and frustrated, but we had only 2 picks in which to gather ourselves and decide whom we wanted next. We had been so focused on McElroy that we needed time to turn our attention to others. Time we didn't have. Even though we needed a great game-changing back, we decided our best option was to make do with the next player on our board, a battering ram, short-yardage running back, Mike Alstott. Of course, after the pick, we knew we would need to meet with the media and say how thrilled we were to have Mike. But as we gave our separate interviews, I know we were all extremely disappointed at how close we had been to getting McElroy. Years later, we came out looking like geniuses for having picked Alstott. He went on to become the 2nd leading rusher in Buccaneers history and to score almost twice as many touchdowns as any other player in the history of the franchise. I'm a firm believer that the Lord sometimes has to short-circuit even our best plans for our own benefit. So here they are. They're trying to make some big moves at the draft and get some great players that they really need, and nothing's working out for them. So they end up going with this guy that they didn't necessarily want, Mike Alstott. And at the time, they're like, okay, like he's probably going to be okay, but who knows? And he ends up being a game changer for the Buccaneers and like going on to almost breaking all these different records and being a great player for them. So you just never know what's going to happen sometimes. We had 2 picks in that 2nd round, and we were prepared to trade our 2nd pick. Rich had told me during the week that Bobby Beathard of San Diego would probably call and offer us their 1st-round pick in 1997 for our 2nd rounder this year. Given that we had so many needs, we figured that was the way to go, if he called. When that pick was approaching, I was starting to have second thoughts. We still hadn't fully recovered from the McElroy-Alstott pick, and I was focused on Donnie Abraham. Donnie would fit our scheme perfectly. He was a solid person, exactly the kind of guy Monty and Herm would like to add to our defense. While we knew that building for the future with an extra 1st-rounder next year made sense, our previous pick hadn't gone well, and we wanted to walk out of there with a 2nd-rounder we liked. When we were on the clock to make our pick, the phone rang. I'm still amazed that Bobby called, just like Rich had said he would. Rich told him we would call him back. We debated and finally decided to trade. Donnie Abraham was still there when we picked in the 3rd round, making our 1996 draft a nice combination of preparation and God's providence. By the way, 2 years later, we added Leland McElroy to our roster when Arizona cut him. Although he was a good player and a great person, he couldn't make our team. Funny how things work out. As we were adding players through the draft and free agency to improve our level of talent, we had to continue working on the mindset of a group that had lived so many years within a negative culture. I thought back to the things Tom Lampier and I had talked about. Nehemiah also inherited a defeated group and had to change their culture and attitude so they could move forward. Nehemiah kept his people focused on their task of rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. Rather than dividing their attention and focusing on the external threat that sought to destroy them, they stayed ready with their swords by their sides while they continued to work on the wall. Each person and family worked to build the portion of the wall in front of where they lived. So here, as he's trying to build this team and get rid of like the toxic, negative culture that has been a part of the Bucs for so long, he's reminded back to when he read the book of Nehemiah and what he learned from that book, and how Nehemiah also inherited a defeated group of people and how Nehemiah handled that. Right? He's kept his people focused on their task at hand. And so Tony reaches for those lessons from back then to apply to this current team and current culture that he's trying to change. The Buccaneers were a group in need of remaining on task, focusing on what was before them. I knew that my job was to keep the guys focused on the things they could control, not on outside noises from media and fans or other things they couldn't control. It's hard enough to be successful in this league and in life without hauling around the extra baggage of distractions. Right off the bat, we discussed how to deal with the media. Negative will sell, I told the team, but so will the positive. So let's always be positive. Whether you like them or not, the media will always be present in the NFL. It's a fact of life, so you have to deal with it and make it as positive as possible. If they hate you, they won't suddenly disappear. They'll just make your life miserable. So don't give them reason to hate you. We then discussed body language and the importance of nonverbal cues. Make eye contact when you're answering the media. Don't act like a loser, even when you've lost. Don't blame anybody else. We had to make sure we were together in this project. We needed to let the media do their jobs, but we also needed to be proactive about getting the message out rather than letting them dictate the stories. I always tried to be very cordial with the media, and my goal was to always be sure that my responses were well thought out. I never wanted to antagonize anyone, but I planned to answer the questions in a way that emphasized the positives without giving too much information. I think the media appreciated our treating them professionally and with respect, although winning probably improved the tone of their stories more than anything else. No excuses. No explanations. So again, when he was an assistant coach, he was taught how to deal with the media because he said a lot of times people never learned until they became head coaches themselves. And so here, now he's been put in the position of a head coach and he is teaching his assistant coaches how to deal with the media. So again, his mentors and the lessons they imparted upon him, he is now continuing to impart on others. Talented Tampa Bay wasn't a major issue. The Vikings had played the Bucs twice a year, so I already knew the talent level was good. The Bucs also had been drafting many of the guys that we had wanted for the Vikings, Sapp, Brooks, and John Lynch among them. So I knew the Bucs had been drafting the right guys, at least on defense. When I arrived in Tampa, the talent was there. It was the culture that had to change. When I was in Minnesota, we knew that if we could get the Bucs down early, they would give up, and we could win easily. But if they started well, they would be competitive with us to the end. It seemed that the team had cultivated a fragile mindset that infected their play for years. They always expected something to go wrong, and it usually did. And how often do you see teams like that? Like they're all excited at the beginning of the game, but then if things aren't going well for them, they just give up. And then you see the opposite of that. Some teams that are behind, right, they go in the locker room at halftime, they come back out, and they end up winning the game. So it's definitely like a mental mindset of an entire entire team that can affect a game. When I arrived in Tampa, I began meeting with the players who lived there, trying to understand from them what needed to be fixed. Although all the issues were relatively minor, they contributed to the team's second-class, defeatist, excuse-laden mentality. I began to sell the philosophy that we are responsible for what happens to us, not anyone or anything else. No excuses. No explanations. Right, so again, that's a major theme of this chapter, right? He's repeated it over and over again. No excuses, no explanations, right? Get the job done. At the same time, I started to address some of the issues the players were bringing to my attention. I realized that by addressing minor issues, we could bring about a major culture shift. The Bucs' previous owner had been known for his frugality, and in order to save a few dollars, the team often stayed in inconvenient locations when they were on the road. When I came on board, we began to stay downtown at Marriott's, Wyndham's, and Ritz-Carlton's. It was a small change, but part of a bigger shift I wanted us to make. The players also complained that they were often treated with lack of respect. For example, the equipment manager was very concerned about the cost of replacing lost towels. He felt that players might be tempted to take towels home to wash their cars or dogs or whatever. He was right. The cost of towels certainly can add up. But his solution was to assign each guy a towel with his name attached to it by a clothespin. This way, he could inventory the towels and know who had taken one. We told the guys we were going to treat them like adults and leave the towels out in a stack. If they could not be trusted with the towels, we would go back to assigning one towel per player. As time went on, we never needed to do that. It was another small change, but part of a bigger cultural shift. I mean, imagine it. You've made it to the NFL, and right, you're making all this money, and yet this guy is still like putting your name on the towels because he thinks that you're going to steal them. I mean, how does that make you feel? It makes you feel like you're not valued, that they don't see you with respect. And so just that little shift of Tony saying, okay, we're not going to do the name thing anymore on towels, started bringing about a larger culture change within the organization. One of the things I couldn't change was the location of our training camp at the University of Tampa. The University of Tampa had been founded more than 60 years earlier in a hotel Henry Plant had built in the late 1800s along the banks of the Hillsborough River. Originally intended as a gateway for vacationing Northerners, it has since been turned into a very pretty school. As a training camp, however, it has seen too many lousy Bucs teams wander through its halls and grounds. I wanted a new, fresh place to train, someplace without any connection to losing, but we simply didn't have another feasible option. I thought of my dad's advice to focus on the job, not the surroundings, and decided to embrace the situation rather than try and change it. I told the guys we didn't want to leave the University of Tampa. We wanted our team to become tough, so we wanted camp to be tough. We wanted the grass on the field to give out during the first thunderstorm. We wanted the dorm rooms to be Spartan. It was a mindset shift, and the guys accepted it. No excuses, no explanations. As for $1, I knew it needed countless improvements. A team meeting room, offices separate from meeting rooms, a room big enough to house all of the weights so some weren't out on the patio, a third practice field, and so on. But as I told the guys, the Pittsburgh Steelers practiced every day on a 60-yard AstroTurf field and had won 4 Super Bowls. No excuses, no explanations. At a team meeting, I ran through a laundry list of excuses our players could easily hang a poor season on if they chose to. We have a new coaching staff. We have to learn a new system on both offense and defense. We have subpar facilities. We have a young quarterback. We never get the benefit of the doubt from officials. We have distractions over our stadium, and we might move cities. We never win in the cold. Those were all great excuses, and we could have used any and all of them. However, our goal was to win football games, and excuses were not an option. Instead, I told them we expected several things of them. Be a pro, act like a champion, respond to adversity, don't react. Be on time. Being late means either it's not important to you or you can't be relied upon. Execute, do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. Not almost, all the way, not most of the time, all of the time. Take ownership. Whatever it takes. No excuses, no explanations. One of the first articles written in a local newspaper after we took to the practice fields in Tampa pointed out the fact that almost no profanity was heard at practice anymore. While I choose not to use profanity because of my faith, I've never mandated a certain vocabulary from anyone else. I simply ask players and coaches to be mindful of their language when we have open practices during training camp. I think the fact that so many of our assistant coaches were positive teachers helped that process. I also continue to emphasize the need for our staff to be encouraging and positive in their approach to coaching. Other changes were a little tougher. I cut out the golf carts at camp and made the players walk or take shuttle vans. I wanted to make things just a little more difficult than they were used to. We didn't allow any hazing of rookies. In fact, I talked often about being a team and developing the trust and togetherness we would need to help us down the road. I couldn't see any way that hazing could help us to do that. That change probably hurt the veteran players the most, since they were now no longer allowed to make the rookies sing during meals at training camp. The only thing veterans were still got were some senior privileges, signing up for weightlifting times, selecting plane seats, and so forth. I made everyone share a room with another player, so veteran players no longer enjoyed the single rooms. I've since shifted my thinking on this a bit. We can all learn and adapt, even though our principles remain intact, right? Now I allow players to have single rooms on the night before games if they choose so. They've convinced me that sleeping patterns can be dramatically different, and too many guys were complaining that their sleep was being disrupted. I do still require roommates at camp, however. So Tony does start instituting a lot of changes in order to change the culture and the mindset of the team, where he's constantly saying, right, his favorite phrase, no excuses, no explanations. And while he does make all these changes, he also talks about, though, in this last paragraph, that sometimes you can be wrong, right? Sometimes you try something new out and it just doesn't work. And that's okay, right? He was willing to try something new out. It wasn't working for his players. They talked to him about it, and he saw their side and ended up changing it back to the way it used to be. And I think that's also a sign of a good leader, right? Admitting when you are wrong, because we're not right all of the time. Some people are right most of the time, but no one's right all the time. And it's important as a leader to listen to the people that you are leading. After all the changes to the roster and the beginnings of change to the team's attitude, we hit the ground running. We were facing the Green Bay Packers in the season opener on the first day of September 1996 in Tampa, and our guys were excited and ready to play. We felt like we were much better than the previous Bucs teams mentally, physically, and emotionally, and we embraced the challenge of facing the team that had won our division the year before. I had given the team a talk at the end of the preseason to remind them of the players' responsibilities and to point out that it might take some time to get the team turned around. Coaches can't tell you everything. If they could, we would need 53 coaches. It has to come from you. We will get it, eventually. Probably not this year, but we're going to get the details covered. But we all believe that the effects of our efforts would be noticed immediately on the field against the Packers. By halftime, we were down 24-3, on our way to a 34-3 loss. Herm turned to me in the locker room and said, "This might be a little tougher than we thought." There was no doubt about that. After dropping the opener, we headed off to Detroit, where we lost. Then we went to Denver and lost again. The Denver game was one that we should have won, but for a mistake here and a mistake there. The following week, I gave a speech at the United Way rally in Tampa, using the following notes. "We won't panic. There won't be a wholesale changes. We will do what we do because it's good, because it's right. Also, we can't and won't let anything from the outside split us up." We hung in there as a unit and returned home to face the Seattle Seahawks. The announced crowd was just over 30,000, but there couldn't have been 25,000 in the stands. I kept a video of the beginning of the game because it had a shot of the crowd at kickoff. That crowd certainly didn't look crowded up there to me. We lost 17-13, squandering a big lead in the fourth quarter. As we walked off the field, a fan hung over the opening, yelling that we stank and that he was never coming back. I remember thinking that day that we really needed to show these people something positive, some progress. I knew it would happen, but when? The following day, I opened the team meetings by showing the game video and telling the team to have faith. There's going to be a time soon when fans won't be able to get a ticket to come to these games. Just hang in there, and we do what we do, and it'll take care of itself. We were at home again the following week against Detroit. As further proof of what a small world it is, Wayne Fontes, a Southern Cal recruiting coordinator who had talked Marvin Powell and Gary Jeter and countless others into playing football for Rich McKay's dad, manned the other side as Detroit's head coach. The Lions shut us out in one big. Another debacle. I was thankful that we had a bye the next week and a chance for the guys to get away from football for a while. At this point, we were 0-5 with 2 close losses and 3 that weren't so close. We all needed a little time to regroup. During our bye week, Brian and Joel Glazer took me to lunch. As Mr. Glazer's sons, they were in day-to-day control of the team. I was certain they were going to offer suggestions or at least point out that the Buccaneers had been better than this in 1995. But instead of giving advice, they assured me they were in it for the long haul. They understood that my plan might take some time to implement, and they were willing to wait. Whatever it is you need to do, you have our complete support. This was a very special moment for me, and it remains a wonderful memory. I was so encouraged to have their backing at that low point in my first season with the Bucs. That was really nice of them, right? The owner's sons take him out, and they're like, "Hey, we still believe in you," which is impressive considering how the team is doing that year. I brought the coaches in for a meeting that week and gave them the same message, this time coming from me. "We're going to get this turned around soon," I told them. "You guys have been great, and the players are buying into what you're teaching. We don't have any wins to show for it yet, but we are playing better. And I can see little improvements, even if the rest of the world doesn't. So hang in there. You have my complete support." I called Coach Knoll and asked his advice. "Don't change what you believe in," he told me. "My first year, we won our first game, but then lost 13 in a row. The next year, we lost our first 4 games. Stick with what you want to do, even though it's not always going to be easy." Similarly, another experienced NFL coach, Dick Vermeil, called to tell me to stick with my plan. He said it looked to him like we were making progress. Do what we do. I never doubted we were heading in the right direction, but it was affirming and important to have the owners and my coaching peers' encouragement. Today, whenever I notice other coaches who might need a word of encouragement, I always try to offer it. I came off our bye week to face Minnesota. Chris Foster and I had a pretty good idea about their talent and schemes, which probably gave the players a little more confidence. They needed it. After all, Minnesota had the best record in the NFL at 5-1, while we were at 0-5. And all the while, we were telling our guys that our plan was working. We tried to make sure that our Wednesday team meeting was upbeat. "This is a perfect setup to get our first win," I told them. "We've had a good week of practice, and we're the healthiest we've been all season. They're the best team in the NFL, but we're getting better each week. Our plan is solid. This won't be a game plan game. It'll be a passion game. Execution, attitude, protect the ball, have a little swagger." We took the field and did all those things. We trailed 7-0 at halftime. In the second half, we scored 3 touchdowns, including an amazing play by Mike Alstott. Not only was he the battering ram we were expecting on that play, he pushed 2 guys backward from the 5-yard line and extended the ball gracefully into the end zone just as he was knocked out of bounds. Touchdown. Once we had the lead, Warren Sapp sacked Warren Moon and caused a fumble, which our Chaidi and Huta recovered. All of a sudden, we realized we're going to win. I can still remember the excitement and relief we felt as the clock wound down and we wrapped up our victory 24-13. We gathered for a post-game prayer. We always prayed, as a lot of teams do, both before and after the game. This particular prayer still stands out, not for what was said, which I can't remember, but because I hope the guys now realized we are going to give thanks in all circumstances. We had already prayed together following our 5 losses. I wanted them to know that a great win would not change our core values. We would thank God both as gracious losers and as grateful winners. Although we had a chance to get on a roll then, we didn't. In fact, we began another slide as we dropped 3 more games in a row and fell to 1-8. One of the 3, however, was the Packers again, this time up in Green Bay. We lost 13-7, but it was better than being crushed as we had during our first game against those guys. Green Bay was a playoff team, and we had significantly closed the gap. The plan was slowly working. Do what we do, whatever it takes. No excuses, no explanations. I pointed to the evidence and made sure the team knew that we had improved, but I also let them know I expected more from them. I said I would continue to treat them as adults, the way I would want to be treated, but I reminded them that there was an alternative. A lot of people say I've got to make you afraid of being cut, afraid of me. I don't believe that's true. I've always believed that if you tell people what needs to be done, they will do it, if they believe you and your motives for telling them. I knew these guys would see through manipulation, but would respond to motivation. I also told the team that, despite my soft-spoken approach, I would hold each of them accountable. There are 3 possible options to correct this and get where we need to be. One solution is for me to change, to decide I'm wrong, to change my vision for this team. That one is not going to happen. Another option is for you to change, put in more time, go harder, pay more attention to details. As a final option, we'll simply have to go find other guys. Your choice. Dave Moore, one of our tight ends, later told me that he had expected me to blow up at the team that night. I was always waiting for you to blow up in practice, at halftime, and Monday game film review, he said. With all the near misses that were resulting from guys just not paying attention to the details, I figured at some point you were going to lose it. But you never did. I don't know how you did it, but I think that's why we finally got the message. Dave forgot one incident, however. I felt good about laying out those options for our team. I let them know where we stood, and now I was ready to move on, turning my attention to our game the following week against the Raiders. But the next time we met at the facility, I completely lost my composure. It was Wednesday before our game against the Raiders, and I was angry. My anger had nothing to do with football or our losing streak, however. I was upset because 2 players had missed personal appearances. Eric Drett didn't miss his appearance completely, but was 30 minutes late for an autograph session at a car dealership. Reagan Upshaw, on the other hand, completely missed a visit to a 4th grade class. Making matters worse, this was the 2nd time Reagan had missed a visit to that class. This appearance was to have been the makeup that the teacher rescheduled after Reagan missed the first. On Wednesday morning, I'd received a letter from that 4th grade teacher, and it was painful to read. She was understandably upset, and what made it worse was the fact that she had explained Reagan's first absence to the class as a misunderstanding. Now, reading about the class's disappointment when he didn't show up for the 2nd time, I was beside myself. I began the Wednesday morning team meeting by telling the guys that we were not going to talk football at all. Instead, I informed them of the incidents involving Rhett and Upshaw. I don't care about the Raiders, I told them, and I'm not going to talk about the Raiders. We need to focus on us, on changing our attitudes and accountability. Obviously, your word isn't important to you if it doesn't involve the game of football. You don't seem to think being accountable off the field is important. But as far as I'm concerned, we are never going to win consistently unless you get rid of that attitude. The quicker you figure it out, the better. I told the team that Eric and Reagan were not the disease, but that they were merely symptoms of a bigger problem. Too many of our guys had the same attitude. They were unwilling to give 100% if they didn't personally think it was important. What you don't understand is that champions know it's all important. I said, you have to understand that all the little things your coaches are asking of you really do matter. Knowing I can count on you is just as important to me as your talent. You'll always find excuses for not doing exactly what you're supposed to do, but that's exactly what creates a losing environment. In 1996, we needed to change that losing environment so we could start doing what we do. That incident still stands as my biggest blow-up in a meeting in 11 years as a head coach. My description of the meeting is far calmer and more coherent than the meeting itself probably was, by the way. So that's interesting, and it's an interesting philosophy to think about, right? These guys, okay, they're pretty good NFL players on the field, and yet they're slacking in their duties off the field. They've made these commitments for these appearances, and yet they're not showing up or showing up extremely late. And Tony's upset about it, which is understandable. I mean, think about that poor little 4th grade class that okay, the player missed the first time, but he's going to come back, and he doesn't show up a second time. Imagine how devastated those kids were, right? If you say you're going to do something, right? It goes back to what he says: no excuses, no explanations. Do what we do, right? Do your job. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And that's the only time he says that he ever got truly upset, and it wasn't even about like actual football or an actual football game. We beat the Raiders that week. We went on to win 5 of our last 7 games, including a game in San Diego, in which I believe we grew up as a team. Until then, the Buccaneers hadn't won a game on the West Coast in about 10 years. Previous teams had tried all sorts of gimmicks to change their luck. They had gone 2 days early, gone 1 day early, kept their watches set to East Coast time, whatever. Anything and everything they could think of. I told our guys that it wasn't complicated. It's a game at 1 o'clock in San Diego, the same time as a 4 o'clock game in Tampa. Just do what we do. We fell behind 14-0 in the first quarter. However, this time our guys stayed the course and played together. For the first time, we encountered adversity and overcame it. We chipped away at the Chargers' lead, played great defense, and won 25-17. John Lynch and I later agreed that the game in San Diego was where our run of success in Tampa began. As we prepared for the season finale against Chicago, I distributed a handout to the players. I wanted to make sure we kept teaching and encouraging all season long. Here's what I handed them. The first step towards creating an improved future is developing the ability to envision it. Vision will ignite the fire of passion that fuels our commitment to do whatever it takes to achieve excellence. Only vision allows us to transform dreams of greatness into reality of achievement through human action. Vision has no boundaries and knows no limits. Our vision is what we become in life. Our vision had to be one of excellence, of playing the best that we could play every time we hit the field, whether it was practice, regular season, or the Super Bowl. This game won't matter in the standings, and we won't make it to the playoffs, I said, but I want you to play as if it were a playoff game. Use this vision to imagine that this game means everything in our season. Show me how you would perform if it did. We dominated the Bears from start to finish. With the win over Chicago, we finished 6-10, dead last in our division. But we had made great strides and really improved. The Bucs players dumped Gatorade on me after that game. Gary Shelton of the St. Petersburg Times wrote an article asking why anyone would throw Gatorade on a 6-10 coach. But he followed up by saying that this year had felt different from past 10-loss seasons in Tampa. It felt different for us too. We finally felt as if we had begun to change the mentality around one Buck and were headed in the right direction. Whatever it takes, no excuses, no explanations, do what we do. Okay, so even though overall they have a really terrible season, there are some strong highlights in that season. And the culture is the major thing that has started to change for the Bucs. So yeah, overall they had a losing season, but if the culture starts to change in the right direction, eventually, right, your win-loss record is going to change as well.